Hello and welcome everybody to the Twins Off Season podcast? Question mark? No, in all honesty, this is the Twins Off Daily podcast brought to you by twinsdaily.com. Twins Off Daily podcast. We got through a whole year of this, and here we are, the skeleton crew. Myself, your host, Sweet Lou Hennessy, along with my good friend, Greggory T. Masterson, coming to you live to talk about a pretty disastrous end to the season, which I'm sure we'll touch on in multiple facets. But Greg, first and foremost, how are you, my friend? What's new? We haven't talked in eons, it feels like.
You know what? You just introduced me as your friend, and I'm just not sure. I'm not sure if I can commit to that. But beyond that, I have not watched baseball in about a week. I don't know. Maybe I'm just so depressed by the Twins end of the season. I have not had it in me to watch the Tigers and the Royals somehow make it into the ALDS. But I hope to, in the next couple of days, start watching a little bit of baseball again.
So if we're not friends, does that make us? What, like workplace associates? Are we?
I would say, we both get paid by Twins Daily, so I think that makes us colleagues.
Okay, all right.
I'll get back to you, though. You sprung this on me. I'm going to think it over whether I consider you a friend or not.
Today's walk-off question: are Greg and Lou friends in real life here? We will get
sound off in the comments.
Yeah, please let us know your thoughts down below in the comments. But no, like we said, it's been a minute here. We are about a week post total collapse of the Minnesota Twins, I guess. The collapse started a lot sooner than the last day of the regular season, which was a week ago. We are recording this on Sunday, October 6th in the evening here. But the stench of what they left in those last couple of months still lingers in the room. Wouldn't you say, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard from an outsider's perspective to really get those vibes, but my goodness, just watching the baseball that was being played, especially over those last two series, you don't want to say that every time that they are constantly making blunders in the field they don't care or anything like that. However, it's really easy to start writing those narratives with the way that they played and just how little they were able to get done against a Baltimore team that wasn't trying, but everything was locked up for them. And the Marlins, who are literally, qualified, the worst qualified team in baseball, I guess, qualified for the lottery, unlike poor Oakland and the White Sox, who can't get into the lottery this year.
Yes. No, that's it's like you said, it's tricky. The vibe I got from the team just in general kind of reminded me of I'm trying to think of like a prey animal, like a possum or something, who plays dead when the predator approaches. They just they flip over and they pretend to play dead. It felt like this team was playing dead for 6 weeks before they were eliminated. Maybe that's just me. Maybe that's pessimistic Lou over here. That's what they call me, right? So it just felt like the club in general, besides just the health, besides just the growing pains of some young players who will hopefully step into those roles a little bit more next year, it just felt like they keeled over. It felt like they were playing dead and just waiting for whoever it might be, the Tigers or the Royals, to put them out of their misery. And finally, that happened. And unfortunately, we have to wallow in it for an entire off season here. But there's bound to be plenty of questions, and we're actually going to start off with our walk-off question here, which we will try to answer at the end of today's brief episode. Today's walk-off question for the episode: which current Minnesota Twin, what's an intriguing name on this club that you don't think will be a part of this team or this organization come opening day 2025? There's bound to be a few changes to be made here. I think it's really easy to say some of the free agents that are going out into the market here, but I think it's more intriguing to think about some of those cost-controlled or at least team-controlled players that might not be around come opening day 2025. So we will start thinking of answers there and let us know if we miss anything. But for right now, let's jump on down into the rapid recap. All right, look, we don't need to talk about those last two series at all.
They were bad.
If the Twins are not going to play like they're interested in competing, we're not going to talk about like we're interested in watching that product that we saw over the last couple series there. But besides just bad, what are some initial thoughts that come to you, Greg, just since our last episode, I guess?
Okay, let me pose a question to you. Do you remember, like, it's only been a week since the Twins stopped playing. So it was it's been 2 weeks since we last met. Do you remember a single good thing that happened in those last two series?
Bark at the Park night. Everybody seems to really
I said good
love
things, not abominations against God and man.
I went to a game as a fan in one of those, and I had a pretty fun time with my family at Dollar Dog Night. But beyond that, there's not a whole lot of good vibes coming out of this team.
I don't remember, honestly. I mean, I know that they won a game against the Marlins. That was, I guess there was decent vibes after that, but I genuinely, like, it's only been a week. It feels like it's been months, which might just be part of how the team, went on the worst streak that anybody could imagine them going on from the middle of August through the end of the year. That it all happened like so fast. But now, like, looking back on it, it's like that seems like it was months ago because it started months ago, I guess, is kind of how I'm making sense with it in my brain.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense too. It feels like longer ago because we hear complaints about, the cracks that might be on this roster when things are going well too.
Right.
We hear these things. We heard complaints about this team in June when they were, 13 games above 500 or whatever it is. We hear those complaints still. And now those are going to become nonstop because the criticism is absolutely warranted, as we've seen from this collapse here. I shouldn't say all criticism, I guess, because after all, on Twins Twitter, it gets pretty out of line pretty quickly. But at the same time, what did they really show us in these last few months that it doesn't make people want to step up and try to defend the club necessarily? But we already talked about just some of the general vibes that came from the second half here. But let's even just look a little bit further. Let's talk about who we consider to be the core of this club, so to speak. I think we have to start with two of the veteran players, Byron Buxton and Carlos Correa. Those are two corner blocker of the clubhouse kind of guys, for de facto captains, I guess you would call them. I don't love that term anyway, but, corner clubhouse guys, veterans that are supposed to put their arms around the young players here, help build them up and be kind of leaders in the clubhouse. So I think you got to start with Carlos and Byron. Who else supplements though? Who are some other core members of this club? Because as we were thinking about ideas for our walk-off question and who maybe is not part of the long-term plans here in Minnesota, there's a lot of names that it's like, okay, I could see this guy being, a cornerstone player, but I also could see them being flipped to try to fix the vibe, so to speak. So, Greg, what do you think? Who are some names that you would consider to be the core of this team, I guess?
This is one. I mean, if you asked me this question 12 months ago, 6 months ago, it would have been a lot easier.
Yeah.
But we've seen Edward Julian completely fall on his face. We've seen Royce Lewis fall on his face. I had not realized how bad it got for Royce Lewis on his year-end statistics. His end of season OPS was 747, 7% above league average. And I don't think that that's a long-term thing. I don't think that I've been on the record. It's been a running bit on this show that I do not believe that Royce Lewis was the person that he was for like the first 100 games of his career. No matter how much the haters tried to tell me I was wrong. No, I don't think that he's going to have like an OPS over 1,000 for the rest of his career and be hitting, what are they called? Grand slams once every 3 weeks. Crazy that I would possibly try to tamp down expectations on that. But like, my goodness, 107 OPS plus. If we want, I want to throw out the name like Matt Wallner, but also it's hard to say like your lumbering right fielder who strikes out at a 40% clip is even, he had a terrific year,
Yep.
especially if you throw out his miserable start, which I guess if we want to cherry pick, we can. But it's hard to say, like, even after the year that he had, that like I feel really confident that this guy is somebody you can, lock into the lineup for the next 5 years. It's a tough question, Lou.
Yeah. No, it really is. There's a lot of guys that are kind of, post prospect status, that have graduated in the last couple of years that you're really hoping would have a clear answer to this question. Guys like Trevor Larnach, Jose Miranda, former early draft picks that showed some huge promise in the minor leagues and have shown flashes in the big leagues here. You're kind of hoping for a little more consistency so that you could say, okay, we know that those guys are going to be part of our plan going forward here. And they very well might still be, but that answer becomes a lot murkier after the second half that so many players seem to have for the Twins here. Going back to Jose Miranda, he just never seemed right once he came back from that injury. And we saw how much the shoulder affected him last year. You have to wonder if maybe the injury is maybe affected his second half performance here, because he was looking excellent in the first half when he went on that streak of a dozen straight hits or whatever it was. He was looking really good. He was in control. He was hitting the ball all over the place. He was hitting for power, which was massive, and something that we just never saw come back in the second half. So I don't know. There's so many more question marks than positives or names that you can write in pen or in bold here. You're inclined to say somebody like Royce Lewis, and if a 750 OPS on the season is the worst that he's going to show over the next 5 years, that's a good sign. That's good. Yeah. But you can't be totally confident that this isn't the new norm. You know what I mean? He's had such a abbreviated and just, choppy start to his career where, yes, he's excellent every time he's healthy. And then he gets these pretty major injuries and he's out for 2 months at a time. I'm not putting that against him, but, we've only seen him be really successful until this year, that is. So these are growing pains and there's something he's going to have to grow through and grow out of. But Byron and Carlos are absolutely desperate for another hitter to join them in that, the cornerstones of the club here, which I guess we could start talking about the pitching. Maybe somebody like Pablo Lopez, Joe Ryan, you could maybe consider those guys to be core members of this team. What do you think?
Respect Bailey Ober too. I mean,
yes, of course.
I feel I mean, there is a little bit of trepidation in saying these 28-year-old pitchers are guys who I see as the cornerstones, building blocks, whatever, of this team.
Yeah.
If we want to say the next 3 years, I believe, are they all under team control for the next 3 years?
Yeah, they should be. Yep.
So if you want to say that, you want to say, okay, who do you see as kind of those building blocks? I have watched Twins baseball for a long time, and there's been very few instances where I feel better about a top three in a rotation. Yeah. And then you can look at guys like Simeon Woods Richardson and David Festa and Zebby Matthews, who all kind of had their coming out party, if you will, to one extent or another. And it's easy to look at those guys and say, I think Sim only has 5 years of team control left, but the other two guys are going to have 6 going into next year. You can see those guys being potential, maybe not like front of the rotation guys, but like if you're growing arms from internally, that's huge. And it's also kind of, even though, we saw Griffin Jax have one of the best seasons out of the bullpen in baseball this year, and he's 29 years old. But he still has several years of team control left.
Yep.
And you want to say, like, this is a guy I can see, counting on for a while, but also he's a reliever. He's a 29-year-old reliever, and you can't ever feel great about that. I mean, we saw it, like, even Yohan Duran this year, who was still great, but not as special as he was the last 2 years. And it's just, I don't know. I have a tendency to be a little bit of a pessimist, but the end of this season kind of brought that out a little bit more, I suppose.
Yeah. I think it's a little more justified, or I'd be more understanding in the Twins bringing their pitching staff back to run it back before a lot of these hitters. I feel like there's a
Oh
lot
yeah.
more question marks with a lot of these hitters. You'll gladly take what the Twins have in, especially their starting rotation depth going into next year, when you're hoping that Zebby Matthews, David Festa, Simeon Woods Richardson can each kind of continue their upward trajectory, and start kind of getting some of the fruits out of that. So yeah, it's tough to establish who really is the core of this club, but it's going to be an interesting predicament, kind of probably in this off season. I don't know, Greg, what do you think? In my head, not just from a lack of spending power, I don't know if I see the Twins being extremely active this year. I think the most action we're going to get is around the non-tender deadline, or the deadline to tender a contract to arbitration eligible players. I think that's when we're going to get some real headlines.
I
Beyond that,
yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm expecting too much from the Twins this offseason.
See, because you look at this roster and they're dropping Santana, they're dropping Margot, they're dropping Kepler.
Yep.
That's basically it on the offensive side, at least. And so all three of those guys, you see kind of the succession plan in front of you, whether that's, Julian and Miranda getting more time at first base, whether that's more time from Matt Wallner, more time with Trevor Larnach in the outfield, still have Castro, all of those things. You can kind of see if they just held pat, they don't really have to do anything to at least like field a team.
Right.
And they don't have the room to maneuver right now with contracts. I do want to really quickly say, I don't know what to make of Ryan Jeffers at all right now. If he kind of lived up to the framing or the kind of defense framing stuff, he was kind of talked up at the beginning of his career, and the stats bore it out that he was a solid framer, did not have a great arm.
Yeah.
And you can have a starting catcher with league average OPS like he did this year, but it also came with the wildest swings in production, and you don't count on his defense. It's like, okay, what do we actually expect out of this guy? But I just wanted to mention that because I forgot to at the beginning. But you can absolutely just see a world where the team just brings back everybody who's still under contract, and you have a competent team.
Right.
Not a great team, but a competent team. I keep coming back to, though, I really think that there's going to be some weirdness going on during this offseason in terms of moving some guys who have some team control, maybe bringing in some guys who, are pre-arbitration that might take some prospect capital being moved.
Yeah.
Somebody who's like a year away from the majors traded for somebody who's good and has a couple of years of major league service time. I could definitely see something kooky like that. But if it's just like, what are they going to get in free agency?
Yeah. That's a really good point, because, especially with where the farm system is at right now, they're generally ranking pretty well among the national outlets. Usually in the top 10 for sure, top 5
Yeah.
a lot of times I've seen. And a lot of those prospects are going to graduate out of,
I'm very curious about how that's going to look.
100.
With those three kind of dropping out right at the end there.
Yep. So we'll see how that goes, but still, there's still a plethora of young talent. And, there's a lot of ballyhoo at the trade deadline of, well, they couldn't go get anybody because they couldn't afford it. There's nobody out there for free. You know what? Go out and make a trade for some of these guys that are making a league minimum. You're going to have to give up more on prospect capital, but there's going to be no better time to do that than right now. And they missed that. So, it's maybe we see something like that in the off season, in which case I could be pretty intrigued depending on who's leaving and who's coming back. But something creative like that and getting another young player in the fold here, maybe shake some things up, maybe make some things add a little better chemistry wise on the club. But it's going to be really interesting, very interesting to track throughout the offseason. And I'm sure we're going to have plenty of episodes where we'll do deeper dives into, trade targets, free agent targets, stuff like that. But Greg and I just wanted to hop on today and just give you a quick introduction to the offseason, to the Twins Off Daily Off Season podcast. We're not going to name it that. That's a mouthful, and I'm already sick of talking about it. But so why don't we move on? Actually, Greg, let's move on over to a special segment of Greg's Gripes.
Whoops, wrong dadgum.
Okay, so you can always count on Greg to have something grinding his gears. This is his therapy session to get it all off his chest. Today's Greg's Gripes, everybody, is actually coming from Sweet Lou himself. No sweet nothings in this episode for me, talking about the beautiful little things of the ballpark experience. I'm going straight for a gripe here. I have a gripe with the stereotypical, I'm going to say white guy that you see at a stadium during a peak moment for his team in the game. And he takes it upon himself every time to stand up and wave his hands and try to get the crowd going. It's like he's got some responsibility and he thinks that he's actually part of the team getting the people going. Don't get me mistaken. I love when fans are, super passionate and really into the game. By all means, stand up, cheer, get loud, do whatever you got to do. But I feel like we've all seen that guy who is trying to get everybody around him, and he turns around. He's got this smug look of pride in his eyes, like he's the one getting the show started here. I absolutely hate seeing that for some reason. It grinds my gears. Like I said, I love seeing the passion. I love seeing fans cheering for their team and really important parts of the game. It's just so cheesy. It's so corny seeing this dude night in and night out thinking that he's the guy, he's the one. You know what I mean? And it's I think it's put me over the edge here. And I just wanted to get that off my chest real quick and in a very abbreviated version of Greggory's Gripes.
Next thing you know, Sweet Lou is going to be saying, I have a gripe with everybody who says we when they think about, why don't you care? Why don't you love the people who love the team, who think it's not them, it's us, Lou. Come on now.
Don't tell them how to be fans. That's what I love hearing. Don't tell me how to be a fan. You don't know. No, that's.
I've never been told that in my life.
Everybody has a right to be a fan, how they see fit. Just like I have a right to call you out when you look really stupid doing it.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Absolutely. So, dear listener, do you have a gripe that you would like to air out? Please hit us up on Twitter at TwinsOffDaily or at Greg T. Masterson if you want to release some steam. But for right now, we're going to move on to a very quick edition of The Closer. Okay, so we don't have a big game set up for you all today, but I wanted to go and talk with Greg about what could have been for this Minnesota Twins club. Like you said, there's been a lot of ballyhoo about the, limitations that maybe they had set in free agency last year of how much salary they could take on, what sort of options they could be presented with. And then also at the trade deadline too, about just how much they were kind of constrained to different financial ramifications or whether this front office didn't want to give up prospect capital. Anyway, there's a lot of targets that fans really wanted to see on the Minnesota Twins that probably could have helped them out. I want to go one by one. I have a list of about 6 or 7 here and talk with Greg about how he thinks having this player in the fold would have helped or hurt the Twins in 2024. So we are going to start with one of the biggest targets from last year's free agency. Fans really wanted somebody to come in with a big power bat to man first base for the Minnesota Twins, and they really wanted Rhys Hoskins, previously of the Philadelphia Phillies, to come in and be that hired gun for them. He ended up signing a 2-year deal with the Milwaukee Brewers for $17 million per season, clearly too expensive for what the Twins were looking for. Greg, how do you think it would have worked to have Rhys Hoskins in the fold for the Twins this year at that salary?
Yeah, it would have been awful, I guess. Even if they did have a little bit more money, he would have eaten into that basically their entire budget for the offseason, which would have deprived us of our friend Manny Magoo. And we
Ooh,
couldn't have stood that. But, I would 10 times out of 10 take the season that Carlos Santana had over the
yes,
season that Hoskins had. Hoskins split time between first base and DH this year about 3/4 of the time at first base and 1/4 of the time at DH. I mean, he's not a good defender. Carlos Santana, at least at minimum, is a good defender, and Santana had a better offensive year, like a much better offensive year, even though he didn't have, an elite offensive year. He was a better hitter. Yeah, I don't know. I hate to say I don't know if they would have had a winning record this year, but I don't know if they would have had a winning record this year if
sure.
Hoskins was the move.
Shows you just how important Carlos Santana was at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rhys Hoskins this year, 214 batting average, right around league average, and he hit 26 home runs, but that's just about all he did. That was really stellar.
Yeah.
Finished the year with .1 Fangraphs wins above replacement. Next one coming up here, Jordan Montgomery. He signed a $25 million deal with the Arizona Diamondbacks with some club options and player option stuff after that, but a $25 million guarantee for sure for this year. And he had just a brutal year. I think he finished the year with like a 6.23 ERA. Anyway, Twins fans were clamoring for this guy. What do you think, Greg?
Well, I mean, at the 3-year deal with opt-outs, I mean, anybody's worth it. I think this question is kind of, are we assuming that the Twins would get a version of Jordan Montgomery that didn't miss spring training?
That's a good question. That's a really good question.
If they would have sprung, if any team would have sprung earlier in the offseason and gotten him, I don't know. I would take him probably over Louis Varland and Anthony DeSclafani at the beginning of the year.
Sure.
But if we're talking about the version of Jordan Montgomery, if we want to, I don't know, it's hard not to blame his season on the fact that he just missed all of spring training.
Right.
So the version of Jordan Montgomery that came out of spring training, I mean, it would have been a toss-up whether you want Louis Varland or Jordan Montgomery to some extent. Just like, obviously Montgomery is the better pitcher, but his performance just was not there this year.
Sounds good. Okay, here's a couple quick ones. So from a free agent from last year, Jorge Soler, the right-handed power-hitting outfielder, he ended up signing a 3-year deal with the San Francisco Giants, $42 million guaranteed. I think he had some varying levels there between year to year, but still $42 million over 3 years. So what's that come out to? Like 13 million,
17,
something like that. 17? No.
42.
Anywho's, what do you think about that one, Greg? Do you think that Jorge Soler would have been somebody that could have benefited this team, especially considering their lack of a, oomph in the right-hand side of their outfield contingent?
100%. Soler would have been huge for this team. He didn't have, a standout year, and he's a little bit of a liability out in the outfield, so he would have had to play quite a bit of DH. How much out did he? He only played about 45 games out in the outfield this year. But at the same time, it's not like the Twins were, they didn't have a set DH. There were not enough competent bats in this lineup for the extent of the entire year to say, oh, geez, I couldn't bear throwing somebody in. It probably would have affected Trevor Larnach's playing time because he got so much DH run with the toe injury. It would have been a little bit crowded, but you know what? Soler would have been a nice deal if they could have ponied up the cash for it.
Okay. I got one more here for you that could be both, a free agent target from a year ago and a trade deadline target. I'm talking about Michael Lorenzen, who was traded from the Texas Rangers to the Kansas City Royals, and he still finds himself in playoff contention here as we record this episode. He ended up signing for just a 1-year contract of $4.5 million to be a nice number 5 starter, provide some kind of veteran depth for the Texas Rangers originally, and then he ended up being enticing enough that the Royals wanted him in the fold as they made their playoff push. How do you think things would have changed if Michael Lorenzen would have been manning the back end of the Twins rotation?
I mean, I still don't know that I would have fully signed on for it at the beginning of the year. Just given, I don't know. There have been, Michael Lorenzen is just a 5 pitcher. However, it would not have hurt to start the year with him in the rotation over somebody like Anthony DeSclafani. I don't know. I think that DeSclafani, if he was healthy, probably has a higher ceiling, but he wasn't healthy, so that's kind of a moot point. By the trade deadline, I try not to look back on this with, hindsight bias or anything, but knowing that you were basically counting on Simeon Woods Richardson to finish out the year, if everybody in the rotation stayed healthy, you're going to get a high mark for innings out of Simeon Woods Richardson. I mean, I wrote at the time, they've got to kind of figure out what Chris Paddock is, if they can count on him down the stretch, or if he's just never going to show up. And he didn't show up after the trade deadline. And then Ryan went down. It would have been nice to have a little bit of stability in the bullpen. You don't have to have young guys who are trying to figure it out on the fly as you're trying to, keep the ship from going down.
Sure.
Yeah, definitely. It would have been a small investment that would have helped a lot, I think.
Yeah, I think that's well said. There's another name on here that I don't need to get your thoughts on necessarily, but I just wanted to throw out there as somebody who really enticed me last year, even considering some of the payroll constraints that the Twins were working with. I wish they would have gone out in last year's free agent market and tried to make a bigger push to reel in Brandon Woodruff on a 2-year deal, similar to what they did with Michael Pineda, where they knew they weren't going to get anything as he rehabbed from his surgery in that first year, and really pay him for that second year of a 2-year contract. I was hoping to see them do something a little bigger for Brandon Woodruff, so that in this offseason, they'd be looking a little prettier with some veteran help. It's tricky too, because he was dealing with a shoulder injury rather than an elbow injury. Creates some kind of uncertainty there, but that's something I'll probably look into later this offseason, that we'll probably talk about what could have been if the Twins had bought low on Brandon Woodruff, a career 3.10 ERA, front end starter, definitely front end caliber.
I've got a question for you. Sorry, I want to throw out a name.
Let's do it.
Should the Twins have signed Miguel Sano?
I want to hear what the listeners think.
Many people are asking.
Many people are asking. He might be asking us for all we know. I think he's working with some burners on Twitter here. Should the Twins sign Miguel Sano? That might deserve a whole episode, just a Miguel Sano centric episode here. But for right now, let's boogie on over and talk about our walk-off question that we introduced earlier. Who in the Twins organization currently do you think would be an intriguing candidate to be shipped elsewhere, or to be shown the door at the very least? Who do you think is not going to be a Minnesota Twin come opening day 2025? Greg, let's start out with you. Do you have anybody that comes to mind as somebody that could raise some eyebrows of getting a dismissal here?
Well, yeah. I mean, Royce Lewis has clearly said that he hates everybody, and he hates the front office, and he hates his teammates. So he's definitely on his way out. Boris is going to go get him a 3-year deal with opt-outs somewhere else in trade, of course. The Twins have burned every chance they have with Scott Boris because they've upset Royce Lewis. I don't actually think Royce Lewis is on the move. Who knows though? With how weird things ended, anything's possible, I guess. Yep. I would say if I were to just, make what if Yohan Duran has pitched his last pitch for the Minnesota Twins? He's owed, or he's estimated, this is his first year of arbitration. They're estimating him at $3.7 million. He still has 3 years of team control left. He has not looked elite. He's looked very good, not elite. He did not hit 104 this year. I believe he hit 103 a couple of times, and that, you shouldn't be like, oh geez, he's only throwing 102. But I don't know. I've never been upset about selling high on a pitcher, relief pitcher. I could see the Twins being strapped for cash if they had $30 million to work with this offseason. I don't see that happening. I could see them making a move to move Yohan Duran, especially with, there are other names in this bullpen right now. It's not like it's, Yohan Duran and nobody else. And
Yeah.
he's set to, they're estimating him making close to $4 million next year. I could see that happening. I'm not advocating for it, but I could see it.
I think you're drawing up the paperwork as we speak. I don't see it happening because, like you said, his velocity down. He did not hit 104 this year. You know who else didn't hit 104 this year? Anybody except like Mason Miller. Like Yonderon went down from elite to just elite. He's still pumping, averaging, what was it, 101, 101.3, something like that on his fastball. I'm more concerned about his location of these pitches than about the actual raw velocity of them.
And you're just throwing that curveball too much. If he's going to throw 102, why don't he just throw it 102?
Just throw it right through him. Throw
What's
it
a
right
splinker?
There's no such thing as a sweeper. It's all sliders.
It's a slurve. We've always had
it. Man. Okay, so my answer, mine might not be a player. I think that there was a lot of dissatisfaction, and this person shouldn't get all the blame for it necessarily, but we've heard little rumblings about just some of the culture around the team, maybe being a little lackadaisical in their preparation for some of these games, whether that's a lack of players taking BP on the field versus in the cage pregame, stuff like that. The person on the field who typically handles a lot of the kind of drills and running, especially of like spring training camp and just pregame motions, that falls on the bench coach, who is Jace Tingler over the last few years. And honestly, I really like Jace. From what we've heard from him, I think he's a great representative of the game, and he does a lot of things really well. I do know that they're going to be looking for a culture shift, though, and maybe they don't want to get that culture shift from saying goodbye to some star players necessarily, but maybe redoing some of the foundation of their day-to-day activities, and some of that comes down to the bench coach. And who knows, he could be exploring other jobs for himself at the same time, stuff like that. So maybe that's a cop-out answer, but I think maybe Jace Tingler would be on the way out before opening day 2025.
Jace Tingler has been at or close to the helm for the last 4 years, 3 different collapses down the stretch. Because that's how he got chased out of San Diego.
Yes.
They absolutely fell apart down the stretch in 2021. He became the bench coach in Minnesota in 2022. Yeah. Right? Am I getting that timeline right?
Greg, I think we're the only ones doing some heavy-hitting journalism, capital J journalism.
Is Jace Tingler the issue here?
Okay, you know what? We have to end this episode so I can get writing this, because this is clicks, baby. This is how I feed my family. You know what? That'll be something to keep an eye on, Greg. Greg, do you have any last words? Yeah. Do you have any last words?
I did ask for some questions on Twitter, and I would hate to let our Twitter followers down. One was from Theo Tollefson, who asked, Greg, how are you going to keep your gripes? Let's see. What is Greg's off-season routine to keep his gripes fresh? I'm just mad all the time. It's not that hard. Even Lou can get into a gripes. It's really not that hard to be crotchety when you're this old and you've seen this many wars. Serving in World War I just kind of changed me. Josiah Waldner asks, what's your favorite type of pizza, Lou? What do you got?
I like a nice breakfast pizza, baby. A little
breakfast pizza
sausage.
From Casey's?
I've never had that. Is it good?
I think that's the best breakfast pizza, at least that's like widely available in the Midwest.
I know a breakfast pizza at a gas station that's sitting under a lamp hates to see Sweet Lou coming. So I will probably give that a try. What do you think, Greg? What's your favorite kind of pizza? Are you familiar with pizza? I know they didn't come out with this until after your retirement here.
Well, you see, actually, pizza is an American invention. Italian immigrants in the early 1900s came over and had like a little snack that they used to prepare. And then Americanized it and brought it back over to Italy, actually. They used to make a thing with like dough and fat and I think just basil or so. No, cheese, olive oil, and dough. And then we Americanized it, added like the pizza sauce and the toppings and whatever. And then they're like, oh, this is a great idea. And then after the war, they came back to post-war Italy and started like saying, oh, this is classical Italian pizza. And it's actually an American invention. They're not teaching you that in schools. But anyway, I don't know. I would say I'm a radical centrist on this. I want to give my top 3 because it just doesn't make sense. I love a margarita pizza. I think that would be number 1. My number 2 then would be a Hawaiian pizza. So we're going to go just the most beautiful pizza to the most ridiculous pizza, the Canadian bacon and ham, and then a pepperoni. So I'm a little bit all over the place in my pizza taste.
You know what?
No judgment.
Pizza's pizza, brother. Pizza is
That's
pizza.
right.
You like what you like, my friend. There's enough room on this for everybody.
And then one last question from is it Melvin Gunderson? Where is Cody? Why isn't Cody here? Melvin, I'd like to say that just like Sonny Gray hated it here, and then Thad Levine hated it here, and now Royce hates it here, Cody hates it here. He's a malcontent, and he's always dodging these things.
What is it with John Bonus and his quick hooks? That's what we're seeing right now. Cody Schoenman got the quick hook from Twins Daily. You heard it here first, everybody. No, Cody will be back. He's busy saving the world one kid at a time here. So we look forward to having Cody back if he ever decides to show his snake face again. But for Greg and myself, thank you all so much for listening. Please, during the off season here, we are going to continue recording every single day as we have been, the last 7 days since the off season began. Greg and I have been recording and keeping them for our secret tapes that we will release maybe with the Patreon when people start paying us for this. But in the meantime, we will continue to release these episodes at some sort of pace here, and we'll get some input as terms of do you want to hear us bi-weekly? Do you just want to hear us when there's news and noteworthy events here? We'll try to get a little more firm grasp of our schedule going forward, but I think you could probably expect us once or twice a month in the off season here. What do you think, Greg?
I mean, I've got a plan. Here's what we're going to do. Every time that we release, we're going to know how many days it's going to be until our next release. And throughout the episode, we're going to be saying, okay, pause this and start listening tomorrow. Okay, yes, pause this and start listening to this tomorrow. We're going to split it up so that you have content. I hate saying that C word. Content every day.
Yes, I love it. You know what? That might be a good plan here, Greg. But in the meantime, like I said, we will keep recording every single day, getting our thoughts for those lost tapes. And if you want to start sending us money in the meantime, we will get you on the list. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, everybody, stay sweet.